Thank you for downloading our podcast, Therapist Talking Therapy. My name is Martin Weaver.
And I'm Nicholas Rose.
Yeah. So we're recording anyway, so the question is, I think you said that it might be interesting just to have a bit of a pause to reflect on the 11 podcasts that we've done. And I don't know what, I was looking at them thinking, initially my thought was they were a bit kind of technical, that we'd done the technicalities of therapy, endings and boundaries. But then, we've done politics, responding to the coronavirus, the Black Lives Matter. We've done one on social media, and then loneliness and bullying. So we're kind of getting into the more, perhaps the psychological aspects of therapy, the experience, rather than the mechanics or the practice of psychotherapy. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes. Yes. The reason why I'm umming, which I do, is that I suppose I've been thinking when I was thinking about a review, what keeps coming up for me is that it's a year since it's just coming up to a year since all of the pandemic started, and that the pandemic somehow was a catalyst for an awful lot of focus on mental health, and I guess also a focus for us deciding to do these podcasts as well. Maybe there was something around kind of new activities, or
I don't know. I'd like to think that if coronavirus hadn't been around, we'd be in the same room, and these podcasts perhaps would have a different flavour. If we'd chosen to do them in the same room.
Yeah.
The connection between us, I don't know, might have been different in some fashion, and maybe come September, if not before, we might find out what that will be.
Yes. Yeah, it'd be interesting to be in the same room and record something, see what the difference is. Yeah. So in terms of review, that's what I was thinking about, and thinking about as we meet today, which is, where are we, 22nd of January, where that locates us in terms of the third lockdown, with vaccines and the highest daily death rates, and hopefully reducing infections. Just where everyone is at this point. I was thinking about how when in the first lockdown people did do a lot of new activities or return to old activities like cooking and arts and crafts and things, and yet this third lockdown, there seems to be less kind of excitement around being able to do new things, I think.
Yeah, I think people have got, in some cases, it was sort of exciting back in March last year because it was different. We didn't know quite what was going to happen. I jumped on my bicycle and cycled into central London during that first lockdown in my allotted space to do exercise. And it was a Friday afternoon at 3:30 in Piccadilly, leading on to Piccadilly Circus. And it was empty. And I took some photographs and posted them. The Albert Hall closed up. Kensington High Street empty. So people took it really seriously. And I think now more people are dying. There's more fear around, and there's more fed upness around.
And I was thinking also loss. That irrespective of whether you may have lost somebody through bereavement, that even when things return to some normality, it's going to be so different that people going back into the workplace, there are going to be people that are no longer there because they've left, even because they would have left anyway. But there's going to be potential for things to be so different. I was thinking.
You know what? I'm gonna pull this back again to the AIDS crisis, because the hidden part of that is the whole cohort of gay men who died, who aren't around today. And I do wonder, if they had been around, how the world would be different. Freddie Mercury, Kenny Everett, to name, celebrities, if you like, and Rock Hudson, there were other ones. And yet, day to day, friends who are around, exactly what you're saying, there's the light world will be different. People have died. People won't want to go back to the office as frequently as they did a year ago, or be in the office as frequently.
Yeah.
Some people may even decide to have changed their careers because of the coronavirus and its effects.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But the longer this goes on, the more change would be happening organically anyway. So it's a bit like if you take a year out from work and then you go back into the office, and what's changed, what's the same, but it's a really substantial difference. And so, yeah, thinking about loss and how we all process that.
Is it possible that one of the major differences between coronavirus and the AIDS epidemic is actually there's lots to gain as well from COVID-19? I think AIDS was about loss. However, if you haven't been affected by COVID-19 directly, nobody you know has died, then there's lots of benefits potentially to doing things differently. And I wonder, it sounds a bit odd to say perhaps, but one of the benefits of the AIDS crisis perhaps is the more visibility LGBTQI now have, that with the Terence Higgins Trust and other organisations up and down the country, gay men were shown to be seen to be taking a moral stand. They're a community activity to be seen in a much more positive light. And therefore, would we have gay marriage today if it hadn't been for that push? What might the positive changes be, apart from Donald Trump being booted out in the future, that brought about directly by COVID-19 and people deciding, I think, as you're suggesting, to do things differently? Letting go of those old things. So you talk about loss, which is true, and yet there's also new possibilities. But we need to deal with the loss first.
Yes, I suppose I'm thinking that I watched the inauguration and saw the change of the guard, if you like, in the US, and in the days since, there's been it depends on the media you read and stuff, I suppose, what you're exposed to, but a sense of a move in the right direction. It is kind of, or is that because it's the victors? Is it the victors' story that we're hearing?
Yes,
but,
our story.
Sorry?
Our story. Yeah, it's a move in the right direction because it's a move in something that we agree with.
Yes, exactly. That so it's complicated, and I suppose that also makes me think about how well we're not out of the woods yet. We're today talking about the borders being closed, and I'm finding that quite a sort of shaking kind of prospect, in a way, to think that we are potentially locked onto our island, locked in, or the virus locked out, or whatever, whichever way you look at it. But the thought of not being able to leave the country is.
When you say the borders being closed, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, well, it's being talked about. It is how they're saying about it. That they're talking about the international borders being closed,
which means that, as you say, nobody could leave the country unless it's for a good reason, or for business, or for.
Yes. Yeah.
And where does that put you in, or what does that remind you of?
Well, as we meet today, my sense of things being very difficult. Hopefully, we're moving in the right direction with the vaccine, and but also there is an undercurrent as well around our country's infrastructure and how it's coping. You know, in the first months, concerns about empty supermarket shelves, and now we have been seeing empty supermarket shelves, not because of panic buying, but because of lack of supplies in Northern Ireland. But it's yeah. So it feels like a very important and potentially difficult time, complex.
I'm looking here just at the news of Sky News and BBC News, and there's nothing here that suggests the closing of borders. So not that I'm suggesting you're wrong, but I'm not quite sure where you've picked that up from. Here we are. Where do we trust
Possibly,
the information that we're getting?
Yeah, I subscribe to Independent newspaper, although the ownership of the Independent is interesting as well.
Because the headline here at the BBC says the epidemic appears to be shrinking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The R rate has dropped. Yeah.
Do we look and see what Twitter is supposed to be telling us? Again, this is about how do we frame and who do you choose to.
It depends who you're following on Twitter. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Festival of Brexit can play a powerful role in healing the UK, organisers say. That'll be interesting. And given what you were saying earlier on about the loss and the victor, you know, who's telling the story, maybe there's something about, you know, whose stories are we going to be listening to? The review, the Brexit review, who's that going to be addressed? How's that going to respond to that? With the coronavirus restrictions going on probably until September. It's my guess. And yet it depends on the numbers.
Yeah.
And as we look back, as you said, you know, people were doing new things at the beginning of the pandemic. Now they seem to be less inclined to do that. And it's kind of fatigue, I suppose.
Fatigue. And I was thinking, as we were talking about all these different things, about uncertainty again.
Where we started from back in June.
Yeah. And how that fits often with the experience of therapy that we revisit. And it's always different the next time you talk about it, because there's a different narrative or a different, but you often return to the same point. And so yes, I've moved from loss to uncertainty in my thinking as we speak now, and how we cope with uncertainty.
It's interesting you talk about moving from loss to uncertainty, and I suppose in my mind it's like a kind of a jigsaw. So loss is there and uncertainty is there, but also so opportunities there. And maybe it's that what I term focus of attention. What is it that we're thinking about at any particular moment in time, and how useful is that, and what's the purpose of that? How does that reflect our own narrative? And maybe in a previous podcast, we talked about relationships and who we are in particular relationships. We might be talking about loss with somebody, an opportunity with somebody else. And they aren't, I believe they shouldn't necessarily be incongruent with each other.
I'm smiling because, yes, we're therapists talking therapy, and yet when you said about jigsaw, I was thinking about how I've ordered a jigsaw the last couple of weeks, and apparently it's being made in Germany. So I had an email this morning saying that it was going to be delayed. I ordered some before Christmas, and they were here. been about 4 or 5 days, and this is currently 3 weeks, the delivery time. And it said about problems with the EU border. So, and then I was just thinking, when we're talking about relationships and how you talk about different things in different relationships, that suddenly I'm talking to you about jigsaw puzzles because you said jigsaw.
Although, interesting phraseology there, problems with the EU border, not problems with the UK border. And where one puts the emphasis on the responsibility for change, and is it our responsibility to recognise COVID-19, even though I've had a negative test. I know I'm two steps removed from anybody I know who's actually either positive or who's been ill. So what responsibility does that have on me that I should take, wearing masks and not going out and meeting people, because I'm looking after them as much as I'm looking after me. There's that uncertainty about, well, it should be over by now, or I don't know anybody, therefore I'm safe. And then we slip into these conspiracy theories. They want us to feel unsafe.
And how are normal under previous times? No normal. But I was walking my dog earlier, and I spotted two men who were talking, but they were very, very close to each other, not even a meter apart. And I thought that's how people used to stand and talk before social distancing, before the pandemic. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where they are in their thinking about the pandemic. Then how much is it part of their everyday? If in the middle of the street they can stand so close together speaking.
One presumes that they're a bubble, or family members, or
well, they'd approached each other from different directions. And then greeted each other like, "Oh, hello, nice to see you." So it was as though they were from.
I think what would have been useful if someone could have created a spray which would colour. The only thing I did see was it was very cold the other day, and people's breath, because people don't smoke a lot these days, so you can't see the air moving. But I'd wondered whether people's breath might give people an idea, oh, actually, we're breathing in each other's air all the time. In the street, going to a tube station, and how many times has the air been breathed that you're breathing,
Yes.
And that might give people a more realistic understanding of transmission.
Yeah.
And that would maybe reduce some of the uncertainty. Oh, it's actually real. Oh, that's what actually happens. But at the moment, we're being told it. There have been lots of fake news in the last 4 years. So there's distrust or uncertainty about who to believe. And that comes into the therapy room and can spread into other relationships.
Yes, into the therapy room, into the therapy Zoom.
Yes, therapy Zoom.
Where we are, into the therapy space, yes.
So as you look back over these podcasts that we've done, I don't know if anything, or what does strike you about the last year? Because we started these all 6 months, or in June, so 4 or 5 months into the lockdown. But I just wonder what your perception is as you survey the podcast I can't say the words, podcast landscape.
Well, the first thing that strikes me is how many we've done. I think, gosh, well, yes, that's a considerable amount of time that we've spent, and it's quite a catalogue. So that surprises me. That makes me think about how this year has passed in a very slow but very quick way. Time. That's a funny thing.
It's not constant.
Not constant. Yeah. And it makes me think of yeah, so I was suddenly feel a bit moved thinking about how we've been able to have these conversations, and now looking back, how important they feel as well, to have been able to spend that time together and have these, from my perspective, from me, not from you, my ramblings, for me to ramble to you, or, well, I don't know, that's kind of sometimes how I feel, is that I ramble. But
We should talk about this one, Nicholas. So tell me, where does this rambling come from?
Where does rambling come from?
Well,
I do like to head off in whatever direction comes to my mind and excite me. So that's sometimes why I think about rambling.
I guess the real question is rambling a problem?
Yes. Yeah, well, back to Freud's stream of consciousness. I do like a stream of consciousness. And yet, of course, it is also quite exposing. And that's why, I guess, from the very start, someone would lie on a couch with the analyst behind, so as the stream of consciousness wouldn't be, in a way, interfered with by too much of the presence of the therapist. But of course, the way we work nowadays is to be sat there, face not directly on. Mind you, at the moment, I'm facing the camera, I'm seeing you sort of face on, whereas normally I would sit at a sort of 10-2 type configuration with
Right.
people. I see. Normally,
Yeah,
just slightly.
I sit directly opposite.
I don't know if that's for them or for me, but that's that's how I usually work. But yeah, so that was a little ramble. You see, I started off saying about how kind of moved I feel thinking about how we've spent this time together, and then I'm talking about rambling. So it's something about how valuable it is to have a space to express, I think. And
yes, it is. But there's a bit of me saying, even a stream of consciousness isn't a straight line. And I guess in our own worlds, or people come to us because that stream of consciousness is being directed in ways that are not desired, or they're uncomfortable or painful. And part of my role, I guess, is to place a few strategic boulders into the stream in agreement with the client, in order to move the direction of the stream in a way that seems more positive and more healthful.
Well, I like that analogy of the stream.
I think of a river, stream, and a stream, it hits various obstacles, or just rocks in the way, or different rock strata, and moves around it or over it or under it sometimes. And clients come to us because they're perhaps damned, in the sense of not being able to move forward. The stream has become blocked. And I see my role very much as saying, let's look at this bit. And if we shift this bit, is the stream then allowed to continue along? And that might be a reframe, a different perspective, a particular intervention. Sometimes it might be saying to the client, stop, as they're going perhaps round and round in a whirlpool and disappearing into a hole. Perhaps they've been knocked off by a particular object, and their stream has now gone off at right angles or a different direction. And I've got to point that out and then pull it back to the direction they stated or they said they wanted to go in.
I was thinking of path, because a stream has a path, doesn't it? So I was thinking about how we can change our path, and to what degree we have choice and our responsibility around what we choose. And yes, if we choose one thing, we don't choose another thing, but do we always choose the same thing? And so what happens through a therapy, hopefully, is that that those choices are brought into the open. You say that you do this. Have you thought about doing that? Or what if you did this? Would you like to do that? And yeah.
Sorry to interrupt your flow.
No, please.
I have described it in the past like a forest is a bit too thick, a bit too dense, so more like woodland. And in any woodland, you'll see trails that have been made by animals and by people.
Mm.
And that's a metaphor, if you like, for our habits, the pathways that we always follow in a journey through a wood. And sometimes I've said to my clients, well, how would it be if we just took a stroll into the undergrowth, a different pathway, a slightly different direction? Maybe the route you're taking is a loop. And if we cut across here, we needn't go round that long loop. We can short circuit the cut, arrive at a different place much quicker and more healthily, and use that energy that we would have used going round the loop to create a different pathway, or to do something different, or to enjoy the pathway that we're already on. And yet there's a belief that, well, I've done it this way, I've always traveled this way, so I'm always going to travel this way. I remember when I used to work in Surbiton in the National Health Service, and there was a direct road from the health authority to the A3. And because it was a direct road, it got blocked a lot of the time simply because of the volume of traffic. And my being who I am, I found little routes around and different ways to get onto the A3.
Mm.
And people would tell me, oh, I was waiting here for 40 minutes last night. And I said, well, I got onto the A3 in 15 minutes because I went off the main road and through all the back streets and found a new route. And they looked at me as if I was mad.
I was just laughing because I was picturing me in that situation and the past, and how I like to try and enjoy my 40 minutes sat in the traffic queue.
Breathing in all those fumes, yeah, lovely.
Well, hopefully, yes, not the fumes, but no. I was thinking about the difference in us. Yes, how I often think about being okay with what is there, but that comes from me. So just in terms of how we're all different, and sometimes what if I was meeting with you in therapy and you said, well, why did you sit there for 40 minutes? So
well, my question would be not so much why do you sit there, but is it a problem that you sit there for 40 minutes? And I've caught myself sometimes with clients, we're going down a particular pathway, a particular issue, and suddenly I say, hey, hang on a minute, is this actually a problem? Do you want to change it?
And I would probably say, well, most of the time not, because but sometimes maybe it is. And yes, on those occasions, I might sit there and it might be painful, as opposed to do what you might do, which is to nip down some side streets. So again, about being stuck in patterns and ultimately that sense that what we can help people with is not only kind of highlighting there are other possibilities, but being able to work through the fact that they are worth taking as well. That quite often we stick with something because any change can have such a ramification, such knock-ons, really. And we really need to be confident that we're moving to something better before we move, I sense. Or I'm talking for myself.
Well, I was thinking just then as you were talking, it's about risk. Maybe we need to do a podcast on risk. And we've taken a risk here because what our podcast listeners might not know is that actually this is also being broadcast, as it were, or played on YouTube. So we're being seen.
Yeah.
And so I'm noticing, am I focusing myself more on the camera and being less kind of relaxed and chilled, or visibly chilled? So maybe if we continue doing this, maybe I'll get a bit more kind of, pulling back a bit and being less concerned about staring at the camera or you or something else here, and be a bit more kind of, more relaxed. But if we don't do it, you won't know, will we?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the technology changing, that because I've kind of thought, wouldn't it be lovely if I could walk around a bit and the camera would follow me, or if it was possible with my patients to see them from a couple of different angles, even, there's more than one camera, so that you can see the body language and the facial expressions, and probably vice versa. So I'm sure that the technology is going to enable us to set things up a bit different.
I think the only way to do that would be to have the virtual reality glasses on. So one of my colleagues I was meeting with just the other day said that he'd been in a freezer with a big jacket on, with the virtual reality glasses on, and the freezer took them down to like -8 or 9 because the person on the other end of the virtual reality headset was in Russia.
Oh, okay.
In the frozen wastelands there, and the idea was, of course, to get the whole experience.
Yeah.
So I guess you might say it's, if you can't be in the room together, be interesting to see what it would be like to be virtually, in that sense, immersed, immersive experience.
Yeah.
If you can't be in the same room.
Can't be in the same room, but yeah. I'm just thinking about how I really feel the cold. So oh, I don't like the sound of that. But I was also thinking about how that would be a conversation itself. The fact that the cold is experienced differently, and maybe the impact on the body, and therefore, how that impacts on the relationship as well.
Absolutely. So all those things are about that. So do you think we should be doing anything different, given our quick canter through the last year or so? Is there anything you think, apart from maybe these YouTube videos or the video of the podcast going out, do you think there's anything we should be doing differently in our podcasts?
I wonder if they should be shorter and more focused. But I have ambivalence about that, because there is something that's very special about having time, and to be allowed in a way to.
Well, to be fair, as I look at them, as I was looking at them, so 54 minutes, an hour, 1:13, 40 minutes on loneliness, interesting. 42 minutes on boundaries, 1 hour for 15 on Black Lives Matter, 38, 43, 28, 53. So I'm not sure. I'm quite happy with the length and the variation in the length. Interestingly enough, our most played podcast is the episode on psychotherapy and counselling. And what is it? And that was 1 hour 13. So
I wonder who the audience was. Wonder if it was fellow therapists or people interested in therapy. Or yes, that'd be interesting to know.
A mixture, I imagine. Yeah. So I'm thinking that this more long. There's so much short form going out in Twitter and all those sorts of things, and Instagram and TikTok, that are more long form process, I think, is more informative, and it's choice.
I know that in my spare time, I can feel that there's something about my energy which means I can often prefer to listen to something which is shorter, but that's only if it's connected to, if there's a purpose to it. So a podcast on therapy, I'd probably want something to be shorter, but a podcast on, I don't know, some historical thing, I might be quite happy for it to sort of wash over me for an hour or two. So I that's why I suppose I wonder who's listening and what they would like.
Have you been influenced by the UKCP and your podcasts for them? Have they given you directions on what works as a podcast?
They said that they thought 30 minutes was a good length, from feedback that they'd received, I think. But again, it depends on. I'm not sure who their audience is. And it's funny because I'm now thinking about the length of therapy sessions. You know, that we often work for 50 minutes, or I work for an hour with couples. Yeah, why? Who sets that? Is that who's that for? And yeah, does that? Yeah, that's such a big subject in itself, isn't it?
Oh yes, because the question kind of following on from that is, what happens if the work is done in 10, 15 minutes? As has happened, I've had a number of sessions. If I were to put a figure on it, it's probably about 20% where the session lasts less than the hour or 50 minutes, because either it's been quite tough in that half hour, 40 minutes, 20 minutes, or actually the client's got what they want. There's a story about, do you remember Smash, instant mashed potato?
Yes, mash gets smash.
Well, they went to that guy and said, we want some tune for this thing called Smash. You know, we're talking about for mash gets smash. And he sat at his piano and goes and said, oh, so you want for mash gets smash? They went, yeah, that's it. And he said, quickest £5,000 I've ever made. Because that was it, you know, in 10 minutes or whatever. He provided what the client wanted. And there's a big argument.
Then, of course, they're not paying for those 10 minutes. What they're paying for is his 20 years or whatever.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
And so that he could do something so quickly in those moments.
And the same for us. There's an argument, do we pay by results or do we pay by time? Do our clients come to us for change, or do they come to us for the 50-minute session or the hour session? There's a podcast for us.
Yes. I was struck by I can't remember where I read it, but I was told that Jungian therapists will, some of them, I don't know if it's all of them, but if there is something which they think is the central theme to the person's presenting concern, that they will stop the session at that moment. They will say, that's it for today. So if someone says something like, oh, well, I always just have to grin and bear it, they'll say, right, that's it for today. There's something about finishing on the thing that they think is the concern, make sure that it's kind of left in the... But so I remember after that, I did find myself at times saying, oh, I wonder what would happen if we were to really stop here on this, because this is something which I've heard you say on a number of occasions, that you grin and bear things. So I didn't stop the session, but I guess I used it as an opportunity to linger on that. But yeah, I guess,
when you say stop the session, I thought you meant end the session.
Yes, well, I guess I mean, I'm not sure. You probably know better than me whether some Jungians do work that way, and whether they contract with their patients in advance. You know, that the session will be up to this amount of time, but it could even be a minute. And whether that's an agreement which is in place, I don't know. If there's any Jungian therapists listening in, maybe they can. So
is this the 10-minute therapy session or the full half hour? If you remember that Monty Python sketch.
Oh no, I don't remember that. No.
The argument, is this a 10-minute argument or the full half hour? With a kind of what do you call it, a hotel reception bell, you know, ding, that's it.
Right.
You've only paid for an hour or 10 minutes, you know.
I should be Googling that now afterwards, see if there's
on
YouTube, if there's a clip there of that.
So there we are, a review, a look back, and forwards on YouTube from now on as well, so people can see us as well as hear us. Yes.
And yeah, I don't know if we've said it before, but I would like people to send any thoughts they have for...
Always happy to get feedback.
Yeah, things people would like us to speak about. Feedback is good.
Absolutely. Good. We're done.
We're done.
Has the session come to an end?
Our review it will turn out to be our shortest. And I think that's because whilst we said we would do a review, and it seemed right because it was coming up to the end of the year, the position that we find ourselves in now, it doesn't feel as though there's a sort of a completion, really.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're finishing in therapy and you've sort of agreed a sort of time when you're going to review or finish, that sometimes, what's going on outside or what's going on means that it doesn't feel like the right time to draw conclusions, particularly. So maybe that's
we are, as they say, in the thick of it at the moment.
in the thick of it. Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know if you had, but certainly there's a thought in my mind that actually we're going to get more busy as time goes on, especially when a line is drawn, and no doubt there'll be some kind of national Thanksgiving at some stage for the end of the coronavirus pandemic. And I wonder how soon after that people will start reassessing. And that's maybe when more change comes in.
And when you say more busy, you mean therapy, counselling and therapy?
Yeah.
Yes, because at the moment the work is in some ways, from my perspective, it's different what's coming at us. There's some really quite difficult experiences people are struggling to deal with, and counselling and psychotherapy aren't always. There's a supportive space, but it's not always the time to process things. In
too soon at the moment, especially those people who are working, in the NHS and the care homes and all. And one group of people we don't really hear a lot about, if anything, are the funeral directors. People in the funeral services. With nearly 100,000 extra deaths in the last year, on top of their normal business, that's got to have some kind of effect.
Yeah.
Something for the future, I would guess.
Yes, I think it's the future.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Right.
What I might do is see if I can annotate this a bit, or animate it a bit. Thank you for downloading our podcast, Therapists Talking Therapy. We look forward to your company again in the next podcast.